Police say that sometime between 9 last night and early this morning, the Bennett family was brutally attacked with a blunt instrument and a knife. Probably this one found in the snow covering their front lawn.
No, he doesn't have any enemies. There's no way. Bruce is the best kind of guy you could know. There's no way he could have any kind of enemies like this.
They were in my house. They bought this house only about 3-4 weeks ago. They're good people, I don't understand what happened.
Aurora, Colorado, January 16, 1984. 10:02 a.m. Patrol officers respond to a home on East Center Drive for a welfare check. Inside, they find 3 people dead: an adult man, an adult woman, a 7-year-old girl. A second child is still alive. She's 3 years old. Paramedics rush her to Children's Hospital. Her condition is critical. The victims died from blunt force injuries consistent with a hammer. One victim's throat had been cut. Investigators also document evidence of sexual assault. The front door wasn't forced. The garage door was still open. That's all the first report says. 4 short statements. No names, no history, no hint of what happened inside that house. 34 years later, a routine DNA swab collected from an inmate in a Nevada prison would put a name on that report. This story is based on court records, law enforcement statements, and verified news reporting. It includes descriptions of violence against adults and children. Viewer discretion is advised. Colorado, 1984. The Bennett Family Massacre. Before we keep going, this channel just passed 530 subscribers. The next goal is 10,000. If you've been watching and haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here. Every new subscriber helps me keep digging into cases like this one. If you're watching from somewhere outside Colorado, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I read every one. Now, let's go back to East Center Drive. Connie Bennett had already called the house 4 times that morning. No answer. By itself, that didn't mean much. Bruce and Deborah had 2 young daughters. Mornings got busy. Then the furniture store called. Bruce hadn't come in. Deborah hadn't either. They'd run the business together for 3 years. They'd never both missed work, not once. Connie grabbed her keys. The drive to East Center Drive took about 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, she came up with one explanation after another. Maybe they overslept. Maybe the car wouldn't start. Maybe the phone had been knocked off the hook. Anything that made more sense than the thought she kept pushing away. She pulled into the driveway. The garage door was still open. The night before, one of Bruce's brothers had reminded him to close it before bed. Connie noticed it right away. She walked to the front door. Her key barely started to turn before the door swung open. Years later, when people asked what she remembered most, Connie didn't start with what she saw. She started with what she didn't hear. Nothing. 2 little girls lived in that house. At 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, it should have been full of noise. She took a few steps toward the kitchen. Bruce, Deborah, Melissa, Vanessa, they were all inside. Bruce Bennett was 27. Long before East Center Drive, he served in the U.S. Navy as a sonar analyst at Pearl Harbor. The job demanded patience, careful listening, and confidence in what the data told you. He carried those habits home. Most nights after Melissa and Vanessa were asleep, Bruce sat at the kitchen table with study manuals spread out in front of him. He was working toward a career as an air traffic controller, another job where guesses had no place. Deborah was 26. Her path looked different. She lost her mother when she was young. As the oldest of the children, she stepped into responsibilities most kids never have to carry. Looking after her brothers and sisters became part of everyday life long before she was old enough to understand what it asked of her. Her brother Larry introduced her to Bruce. The relationship moved quickly. 2 people looking for something steady had found it in each other. Then came 2 daughters. Melissa was 7. Family members remembered her as the one who always had an opinion. The birthday cake, the guest list, which cousin got to sit beside her. She was 2 days away from turning 8. Vanessa was 3. If Melissa went somewhere, Vanessa usually wasn't far behind. In 1983, Bruce and Deborah saved enough for the down payment on their first house. East Center Drive. A quiet Aurora neighborhood filled with young families, matching driveways, chain-link fences, and people trying to get through another work week while raising kids. Neighbors waved across the street. Doors didn't always get locked. Bruce and Deborah worked together too. They distributed furniture for Bruce's uncle's business. 1 truck, 1 calendar, 1 set of keys. The house had one small habit that nobody thought much about. The garage door didn't always get closed at night. Not because anyone chose to leave it open. It usually lost out to everything else waiting inside. Dirty dishes, bath time, homework, a tired family ready for bed. Sunday, January 15th, 1984, felt like dozens of Sundays before it. Connie was there. Bruce's brothers, Richard and Daniel, were there too. The family celebrated Melissa's birthday a little early. Her party with school friends was still a couple of days away. Someone gave her a small electric organ. She played it exactly the way a 7-year-old would. Loud, off-key, completely thrilled with herself. There was birthday cake. There was laughter. By 9 o'clock, people started putting on their coats. One of Bruce's brothers looked toward the garage. The door was still open. He reminded Bruce before heading home. Bruce nodded. Then someone said something inside the house. Bruce turned around. The garage door stayed open. By 9:30 that night, everyone had gone home. The dishes stayed in the sink until morning. Deborah got the girls ready for bed. Vanessa took her bath. Melissa tried to bargain for 10 more minutes before lights out. She made the same argument most nights. She usually lost. Bruce planned to make one last walk through the house before turning in. Lock the doors. Check the garage. At some point, that routine broke. Investigators later concluded the garage either wasn't checked at all, or it was checked and never closed. Outside, the January air kept getting colder. Sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, someone walked up the driveway. The garage door was still open. There was no need to force a window, no need to kick in the front door. The house was already open. Bruce was attacked near the staircase. Deborah was attacked in the master bedroom. Melissa was killed in the girls' bedroom. Vanessa survived. When first responders found her, she was wedged into the narrow space between the bed and the wall. Her injuries were so severe that doctors later described her survival as extraordinary. Investigators believed the killer brought the murder weapon with him. The injuries pointed to a hammer. It wasn't inside the house. Neither was the person who carried it. A kitchen knife used during the attack was found outside in the snow. By sunrise, East Center Drive looked almost unchanged. The driveway, the house, the open garage, light still spilling across the snow. From the street, nothing looked out of place. Connie stepped inside first. The heat was still on. A few lights were still burning. Nothing looked abandoned. It made the silence harder to understand. She walked toward the kitchen. Bruce was lying near the bottom of the stairs. He'd been struck over and over across the head. His throat had been cut. Bloodied handprints marked the banister. Investigators believed he survived the first blows long enough to reach for the stairs. He never made it farther. Connie kept moving. In the master bedroom, Deborah was on the bed. She'd been beaten to death. Several drawers had been pulled open. A wallet lay emptied across the floor. Someone had searched the room for cash. There wasn't much to take. Then she reached the girl's bedroom. Melissa was 7 years old. She'd been beaten with the same type of weapon used on her parents. Investigators also determined she had been sexually assaulted. A child's blanket had been pulled over her. That detail stayed with detectives. It suggested the killer paused before leaving. That's where we'll stop. The rest belongs to the people who lived through it. Connie still hadn't found Vanessa. A firefighter did. He heard a faint sound coming from the narrow space between the bed and the wall. Vanessa was 3, barely conscious, curled into the gap the way a frightened child hides when there's nowhere else to go. Paramedics rushed her to Children's Hospital in Denver. She had a fractured skull, a shattered jaw, a broken pelvis. Doctors gave her multiple blood transfusions before they could stabilize her. She spent weeks in a coma. She survived. Connie ran to a neighbor's house and pounded on the door until someone answered. The 911 call came in at 10:02 a.m. By the time patrol officers arrived, Connie had stopped screaming. She stood motionless outside the house. Inside, investigators followed a single set of bloodied boot prints. They led through the garage and out into the snow. There, they disappeared among older tracks. The tread didn't match the boots worn by anyone at Melissa's birthday gathering the night before. The hammer was gone. The knife was outside. The person responsible had already walked back into a neighborhood that was beginning another ordinary Monday morning. Aurora police closed off the block within the hour. One of the detectives at the scene was Steve Connor. At the time, he had no reason to think this case would stay with him for most of his career. Crime scene technicians worked through the house one room at a time. They recovered 31 fingerprints. They collected semen from the carpet beneath Melissa's body and from the comforter covering her. In 1984, there was no way to identify a suspect from either sample. They photographed the boot prints, they searched for the hammer, they never found it. Detectives knocked on doors across the neighborhood. This was the kind of street where people noticed an unfamiliar car, where a dog barking in the middle of the night usually meant somebody looked outside. Nobody remembered seeing a stranger, nobody remembered hearing a scream, nobody remembered anything that pointed to the person who walked into that house. The tip line filled quickly. Former boyfriends, neighbors, delivery drivers, co-workers, people whose names surfaced because someone thought they seemed unusual. Detectives checked every lead. Everyone came back empty. Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa were laid to rest a few days later. The church filled beyond capacity. Neighbors stood beside co-workers. People who knew the family well stood beside people who had only exchanged a wave across the street. Flowers covered the porch on East Center Drive. Sympathy cards kept arriving long after the funeral ended. At Children's Hospital, Vanessa was still fighting for her life. Doctors focused on keeping her alive. Therapists tried to learn whether she remembered anything from that night. Every interview ended the same way. She became overwhelmed. The questions stopped. She was 3 years old. There was nothing investigators could rely on. By the end of January, Aurora police had shelves of evidence. They had fingerprints, biological evidence, boot prints, photographs, hundreds of interviews, no suspect. One house on East Center Drive had become a crime scene people quietly avoided after dark. The strange part is this: the Bennett murders weren't the first attack. They weren't even the second. By the end of January 1984, investigators were treating the Bennett murders as one case. They were wrong. The attack on East Center Drive was the fourth in 23 days. 12 days earlier, on January 4th, a young couple named James and Kimberly were asleep in their Aurora home, only a few miles away. James had spent the evening recording music for a friend. Nothing about the night stood out. After they went to bed, someone entered the house through an open garage. Kimberly woke to a hammer striking her head. She caught only the outline of the person standing over her before she screamed. James ran to help her. The attacker turned the hammer on him. His skull was fractured. Both survived. Outside, officers found Kimberly's purse in the snow. The cash was gone. Everything else was still inside. 6 days later, on January 10th, 50-year-old Patricia Smith returned to the Lakewood home, where she was helping her daughter and grandchildren settle in. She'd spent the day running errands. She ate lunch. She went home. Someone was waiting. Patricia was beaten to death with a hammer. Investigators determined she had also been sexually assaulted. One of her grandchildren's blankets had been pulled over her body. The hammer was left behind. That same evening, less than 25 miles away, a flight attendant named Donna pulled into her garage after work. Before she could get out of her car, someone struck her in the head with a hammer. She survived. The injuries left her with no memory of the attack. Police found the blood-covered hammer inside her car. There were no usable fingerprints. 4 attacks, 3 households, 23 days. No one realized they were connected. Aurora police had one file, Lakewood police had another. Arizona investigators would soon open a third. In January 1984, there was no CODIS, no shared regional DNA database, no computer system linking agencies together. There were paper files, phone calls, departments working the same offender without knowing it. The FBI sent a profiler to review the evidence. The assessment described a white male, likely in his early 20s, someone methodical, someone comfortable doing manual labor, someone who moved through unfamiliar houses with confidence. Robbery didn't appear to be the motive. Money and valuables were left behind at nearly every scene. The violence kept escalating. Each attack was more brutal than the one before it. The profile ended with one prediction: whoever was responsible wasn't finished. 11 days after the Bennett murders, another attack unfolded. This time it happened in Kingman, Arizona, about 700 miles from Aurora. Roy Williams woke to someone standing over his bed. The first blow came from a piece of granite weighing about 25 pounds. His attacker had picked it up outside the house. Roy survived. A few hours later, a patrol officer spotted a disheveled man trying to hitchhike near Roy's neighborhood. Something about him matched the description witnesses had given. The officer asked to see his shoes. The tread matched impressions left at the crime scene. The man ran. He didn't get far. His name was Alex Christopher Ewing. He was 23 years old. He drifted from job to job, mostly construction and manual labor. Records later showed he'd received a Colorado driver's license the previous summer. He hadn't been passing through Denver. He'd been living there, working beside people who had no idea what he was doing after work. Arizona investigators had no reason to connect him to Colorado. As far as they knew, Ewing was responsible for one violent attack in one state. For a brief moment, everything lined up. The suspect was in custody. Less than 2 weeks had passed since the Bennett murders. Then, the opportunity disappeared. Ewing was transferred to a detention facility in Utah while he waited to return to Arizona for court. He told investigators he had hitchhiked out of Colorado. No one connected that story to the unsolved murders back in Aurora. On August 9, 1984, deputies transported him back to Arizona. During a stop at a gas station in Henderson, Nevada, prisoners were allowed to use the restroom. Ewing ran, again. That night, he broke into another home. He attacked a husband and wife with an axe handle while they were in bed. Both survived. 2 days later, park rangers found him near Lake Mead. He had been free for less than 48 hours. A Nevada jury convicted him of escape and the assault. The judge sentenced him to 110 years in prison. Arizona never moved forward with the Roy Williams case. The sentence in Nevada guaranteed Ewing would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Colorado still didn't know who he was. There's another piece to this story. James, Kimberly, Donna, all three survived attacks investigators would later connect to Ewing. None of them ever faced him in a Colorado courtroom. Not because the evidence was weak. Colorado law in 1984 gave prosecutors only 3 years to file attempted murder charges. By the time investigators identified Ewing, that deadline had passed. 3 survivors, no trial, no verdict, no sentence carrying their names. For years, Alex Ewing disappeared into the Nevada prison system. At the same time, 3 unsolved Colorado cases already held his DNA. Investigators just didn't know whose DNA it was. After 1984, the Bennett case didn't stop. It waited. The evidence collected that night stayed in storage while forensic science slowly caught up. Investigators had recovered semen from the carpet beneath Melissa's body and from the comforter covering her. Every sample was carefully collected. Every sample was logged. One piece of evidence never reached the state crime lab. Not in 1984, not in 1985. The comforter stayed in storage for 5 years before anyone realized it had never been submitted. By then, Vanessa had spent years recovering from injuries that nearly killed her. When the comforter finally reached the lab in 1989, scientists produced only a partial DNA result. It wasn't enough to identify anyone. The following year, investigators found something else tucked away in the evidence. One microscopic hair. It went straight to specialized testing. The test destroyed it. The only strand they had disappeared during the process. No profile, no identification. In 2001, technology finally caught up with the evidence. Scientists developed a full DNA profile from material collected inside the Bennett home. 17 years had passed. The profile went into CODIS. Nothing came back. The DNA belonged to someone. Investigators had no name to compare it to. 9 years later, in 2010, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation revisited the Patricia Smith case. The DNA matched. The same person had attacked both homes. Prosecutors filed murder charges against a John Doe. Not because they knew who he was, because they didn't. The filing preserved the case while detectives kept looking for his identity. Around that same time, investigators turned to Parabon nanolabs. Using DNA alone, analysts estimated the suspect's ancestry, eye color, skin tone, and facial features. For the first time, detectives had something resembling a face, not a photograph, not a suspect. A face with no name attached to it. Steve Connor never let the case drift away. He had walked into the Bennett house in 1984 as a young detective. Decades later, he was still working the same file. The evidence was stronger than it had ever been. The science was stronger than it had ever been. One thing was still missing: a matching DNA sample. In 2013, Nevada passed a law requiring convicted felons to provide DNA samples. It sounded straightforward. It wasn't. The law applied going forward. Thousands of inmates already serving prison sentences weren't included. For 3 years, that gap remained. In 2016, the Nevada Attorney General issued a legal opinion. The law would apply retroactively. Prisons began collecting DNA from inmates who had entered the system long before routine DNA testing existed. Alex Ewing was one of them. In July 2018, a forensic scientist in Washoe County swabbed the inside of his cheek. It looked like another routine collection, another sample, another inmate. The profile was entered into CODIS. Days later, Colorado finally had a name. In the summer of 2018, Detective Steve Connor got the call he'd been waiting more than 3 decades to receive. A DNA hit had come back. The source wasn't Colorado. It was a Nevada prison. Connor pulled every report connected to the Bennett case. Every interview, every tip, every suspect. Thousands of pages. Alex Christopher Ewing wasn't in any of them. Not once. For 34 years, detectives had chased leads across Colorado. The man they were looking for had never appeared in a single report. Before filing murder charges, investigators wanted more than a CODIS match. A team of Colorado detectives flew to Nevada. They never told Ewing why they were there. He talked freely. He described growing up in an Air Force family. He spoke about an illness he believed changed him as a child. He talked about construction jobs he'd worked around Aurora and Lakewood during the early 1980s. Without realizing it, he placed himself in the same 2 cities where the attacks had happened. The detectives returned the next day. This time they brought photographs. 6 black and white crime scene photographs. Ewing studied each one. He said he didn't recognize any of them. Then detectives placed another photograph on the table. It wasn't a crime scene. It was Patricia Smith. Alive, an ordinary family photograph. Ewing said he'd never seen her before. Then detectives showed him the next picture, Patricia Smith as investigators found her. According to the arrest affidavit, Ewing physically recoiled. The detectives told him his DNA matched evidence collected from both the Bennett and Smith murder scenes. He answered with 5 words, "There's got to be a mistake." He never explained how his DNA reached either house. Instead, he asked for a lawyer. Investigators obtained a court order for a new DNA sample. The laboratory results matched the earlier CODIS hit. The evidence pointed to the same man. On August 10, 2018, Alex Christopher Ewing was charged with the murders of Bruce Bennett, Deborah Bennett, and Melissa Bennett. 34 years after the garage door stayed open, detectives finally knew who had walked through it. Getting Alex Ewing into a Colorado courtroom took almost 2 years. His attorneys challenged the extradition from Nevada through the state courts, then the federal courts. The appeals reached the United States Supreme Court. The court declined to hear the case. Ewing was sent back to Colorado. The Bennett murders went to trial first. The prosecution built its case around DNA. The defense focused on what wasn't there. No fingerprints belonging to Ewing. No murder weapon. Evidence collected in 1984, long before DNA testing became part of everyday criminal investigations. Jurors heard both sides. They also heard from forensic scientist Yvonne Woods. She testified about the DNA evidence connecting Ewing to the Bennett crime scene. After deliberating, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Alex Ewing was convicted of murdering Bruce Bennett, Deborah Bennett, and 7-year-old Melissa Bennett. 11 days later, the judge imposed 3 consecutive life sentences. The Patricia Smith case followed. The first trial opened in October 2021. It didn't end with a verdict. The defense requested a competency evaluation. The judge declared a mistrial. Ewing was found competent to stand trial. A second trial began the following spring. Again, prosecutors relied on DNA. Again, the defense pointed to what was missing: no fingerprints. Evidence handled decades before modern DNA testing. The possibility of cross-contamination because evidence from the Bennett and Smith cases had passed through the same laboratory. The jury deliberated for about 4 hours. On April 7, 2022, they found Ewing guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of felony murder for Patricia Smith's death. 5 days later, the court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, the maximum sentence available under Colorado law for a murder committed in 1984. One part of this story didn't become public until years later. The forensic scientist who testified in both trials, Yvonne Woods, later became the subject of a criminal case of her own. That raised new questions, not about who processed the evidence, about how some of it had been handled. Sentencing in the Bennett case came 11 days after the verdict. For the first time in 37 years, the courtroom had a defendant instead of an unidentified DNA profile. The judge didn't soften his words. He called the murders an abomination. Then he imposed 3 consecutive life sentences. one for Bruce, one for Deborah, one for Melissa. Under Colorado law as it existed in 1984, Alex Ewing would die in prison regardless of what happened in the Patricia Smith case. Then the families spoke. Connie Bennett walked to the podium. She was 87 years old. 37 years earlier, she'd driven to East Center Drive because no one was answering the phone. She found her son's family. She looked directly at Ewing. Some people, she said, would call him an animal. She wouldn't. Animals have a purpose in this world. He did not. 8 months later, Patricia Smith's family stood in another Colorado courtroom. The second jury had already returned its verdict. The judge imposed the maximum sentence the law allowed for a murder committed in 1984. Life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Smith's children addressed the court. They spoke about waiting nearly 4 decades for someone to answer for their mother's death. 2 juries, 2 guilty verdicts, 4 life sentences. When Colorado arrested Alex Ewing in 2018, he believed he was working toward parole in Nevada. By the time both Colorado cases were over, that possibility was gone. Connie Bennett wasn't the last person to address the court. Vanessa Bennett Schultz stood next. She was 41 years old. The 3-year-old found between the bed and the wall had grown up. She introduced herself to the courtroom by saying she was sure her parents and her sister had been wonderful people. She wished she remembered them. She couldn't. The injuries she survived also took away every memory of the family she lost. She spoke about the years that followed. Depression, anxiety, anger, nearly 20 years addicted to heroin. She told the court she had been sober for years, but some things never disappeared. She still wondered who she might have become if January 15, 1984, had been an ordinary night. Alex Ewing sat a few feet away. She told him he had stolen every chance she ever had to know her parents. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary day families are supposed to have together. She also made something else clear. He hadn't taken everything. She was still there, still standing, still speaking for the people who no longer could. Those statements closed one chapter. The case itself didn't. Years after both convictions, questions surfaced about work performed by Colorado Bureau of Investigation forensic scientist Yvonne Woods. In 2026, Woods pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts involving misconduct and unrelated forensic work after prosecutors dropped the remaining charges as part of a plea agreement. Investigators identified documented problems with evidence in the Patricia Smith case. No confirmed testing anomaly has been reported in the Bennett evidence. Both cases were processed by the same analyst during the same week in July 2018. Those facts have become part of Ewing's post-conviction arguments. The DNA match linking him to the Bennett murders remains in place. The appeals continue. One garage door stayed open, not because anyone thought it was safe, not because anyone forgot something important, because it was the end of a family birthday. There were dishes in the sink, a new electric organ in the house, 2 little girls who had gone to bed expecting another school week. That ordinary Sunday became the center of a murder investigation that lasted 34 years. The evidence never disappeared. The science needed to read it simply didn't exist yet. When it finally did, the answer wasn't hiding in a witness statement or a confession. It was waiting inside a DNA profile collected decades earlier. Alex Ewing now stands convicted of the murders of Bruce Bennett, Deborah Bennett, Melissa Bennett, and Patricia Smith. He remains in prison. His appeals continue through the courts. The questions raised about forensic analyst Yvonne Woods are now part of those legal proceedings. No confirmed testing anomaly has been reported in the Bennett evidence. The DNA match identifying Ewing in the Bennett case remains in place. Vanessa Bennett Schultz once told the court she couldn't remember her parents or her sister. The attack took those memories from her before she was old enough to keep them. The photographs remain, the court records remain, the evidence remains. Those are the pieces left behind for the family that lost almost everything. If cases like this matter to you, and you want updates as new court filings and appeals become public, subscribe and let me know your thoughts below.